Ever wondered how medieval butchers kept meat fresh without refrigeration? Blood streams down cobblestone streets, flies buzz around hanging carcasses, yet somehow meat stayed good for months. These survival secrets we've almost forgotten could mean the difference between life and death. Town butchers. Medieval butchers held life or death power over entire communities through their meat preservation skills and guild-protected monopolies. Fresh meat was pure luxury. Most families ate it only on special occasions or after successful hunts. Butcher stalls dominated market squares where blood-stained wooden tables displayed daily cuts while strict guild rules determined who could sell meat, where shops operated, and what prices were charged to hungry customers. Dawn slaughter. Every morning before sunrise, medieval butchers began the race against time that determined whether families ate fresh meat or risked deadly food poisoning from spoiled flesh. Animals were slaughtered at dawn when cool air slowed bacterial growth, giving butchers maximum daylight hours to process, sell, and preserve meat before dangerous decay set in. Cattle, pigs, and sheep died quickly through precise throat cuts that drained blood completely. Any blood left in meat accelerated spoilage and attracted flies that spread disease throughout entire communities. Salt magic. Salt became medieval butchers' most precious weapon against meat spoilage, worth its weight in silver and stored like treasure in locked wooden chests behind shop counters. Heavy salt packing drew moisture from fresh meat through osmotic pressure, creating environments where deadly bacteria couldn't survive or multiply into food poisoning levels. Butchers learned to completely bury meat cuts in coarse salt crystals, pressing layers down firmly to eliminate air pockets where rot could begin. This process required enormous salt quantities, MIS. Preserving one pig needed 50 pounds of expensive salt that cost more than most peasants earned in months. Smart butchers recycled salt by collecting, cleaning, and reusing crystals multiple times until they dissolved completely into worthless brine that couldn't preserve anything safely. Smokehouses. Medieval smoking techniques transformed raw meat into preserved foods that lasted months without spoiling, using controlled fires that burned continuously in specialized wooden structures built behind butcher shops. Slow-burning hardwood fires created dense aromatic smoke clouds that penetrated deep into meat fibers while driving out moisture that encouraged bacterial growth and dangerous decay. Oak, hickory, and apple wood produced the best preservation results because they burned slowly at consistent temperatures without creating harmful chemicals that made smoked meat taste bitter or become toxic to human consumption. Butchers hung meat strips on wooden racks positioned precisely above smoldering coals, maintaining optimal distance that cooked surfaces without creating internal heat that promoted spoilage. This process required constant attention for 3 to 7 days as butchers fed fires regularly, adjusted hanging heights, and rotated meat pieces to ensure even smoke penetration that created protective barriers against insects, bacteria, and environmental contamination that killed entire families who ate spoiled meat during desperate winter months. Air drying. Cold, dry climates provided natural preservation environments where medieval butchers hung meat strips in open air to create jerky-like products that fed traveling merchants and military campaigns lasting months across dangerous territories. Mountain regions and northern countries offered perfect conditions, lag, freezing temperatures that stopped bacterial growth, combined with constant wind circulation that dried meat surfaces before decay could penetrate internal tissues and create deadly toxins. Butchers cut meat into thin strips following muscle grain patterns, maximizing surface area exposed to drying air while maintaining structural integrity that prevented pieces from falling apart during handling and transport. Proper air drying required precise timing. Too little drying left dangerous moisture that encouraged spoilage, while excessive drying created rock-hard meat that broke teeth and provided poor nutrition for people who desperately needed protein during long journeys or siege conditions. Successful air-dried meat developed hard, protective outer layers that sealed internal moisture, while creating portable protein sources that sustained entire armies during military campaigns, where fresh food supplies were impossible to maintain or transport safely across hostile, enemy territories. Brine barrels. Large wooden barrels filled with concentrated salt water became medieval butchers' underwater storage systems where meat could survive submerged for months without developing the rot that killed customers and destroyed business. Reputations. Brine pickling required precise salt-to-water ratios that butchers learned through dangerous trial-and-error experimentation. SAB. Too little salt allowed bacterial growth that poisoned entire families, While excessive salt concentrations made meat inedibly salty and wasted expensive preservation materials that cost more than the meat itself, master butchers developed secret brine recipes using specific salt types, adding herbs like bay leaves and juniper berries that provided additional antimicrobial protection while improving flavor profiles that attracted wealthy customers willing to pay premium prices for superior preserved meat products. These massive barrels required constant maintenance as butchers checked brine levels, removed spoiled pieces before they contaminated entire batches, and added fresh salt water to replace evaporation losses that weakened preservation strength. Successful brine operations could preserve entire pigs or beef quarters for 6 to 8 months, providing protein sources during winter famines when fresh meat became impossible to obtain through hunting or livestock slaughter that required animals communities couldn't afford to lose during harsh survival periods. Fat storage. Medieval butchers discovered that animal fat created perfect anaerobic environments where preserved meat could survive sealed away from oxygen, moisture, and bacteria that caused dangerous spoilage threatening customer health and business survival. This confit technique required rendering large quantities of pork, beef, or goose fat into liquid form through slow heating processes that separated pure fat from water and protein impurities that encouraged bacterial growth if left mixed together in storage containers. Cooked meat pieces were completely submerged in hot melted fat that hardened into protective barriers as temperatures cooled, creating sealed storage systems that excluded air contact necessary for most decay processes to begin and spread throughout preserved foods. Clay pots, wooden barrels, and stone containers held these fat-preserved meat supplies that could last 2 months when stored in cool, dark cellars beneath butcher shops where temperature fluctuations were minimized. Butchers learned to layer different meat types in single containers, with denser cuts at bottom and lighter pieces floating near surface layers where fat seals were most vulnerable to air exposure and temperature changes. This preservation method was expensive because it required large amounts of valuable animal fat that had multiple uses for cooking, soap making, and lamp fuel that generated significant income when sold separately rather than used for meat preservation that might fail and waste expensive resources. Spice preservation. Exotic spices functioned as both status symbols and powerful preservatives that wealthy medieval families used to extend meat storage life while demonstrating their prosperity through expensive flavor additions that poor people could never afford to purchase or use regularly. Black pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and other imported spices contained natural antimicrobial compounds that inhibited bacterial growth, while masking early spoilage odors that warned customers about potentially dangerous meat products that could cause severe food poisoning or death. Wealthy butchers created spice rubs using crushed peppercorns, ground cloves, and salt mixtures that formed protective crusts on meat surfaces, preventing air exposure that accelerated decay, while adding exotic flavors that justified premium prices charged to affluent customers who could afford luxury food products. Vinegar, made from fermented wine or fruit juices, provided acidic environments where harmful bacteria struggled to survive and multiply into dangerous concentrations that threatened human health through consumption of contaminated meat products. These preservation techniques required significant investment in expensive imported materials that traveled thousands of miles through dangerous trade routes, making spice-preserved meat luxury items accessible only to nobles, wealthy merchants, and high-ranking clergy who could afford both the base meat costs and additional spice expenses. Smart butchers marketed spice-preserved meat as medicine as well as food, claiming health benefits that justified extreme prices while providing genuine preservation benefits that extended storage life during seasons when fresh meat became unavailable through normal supply channels that depended on livestock availability and seasonal slaughter patterns. Guild rules. Medieval butcher guilds enforced strict quality control regulations through severe punishments that protected community health, while maintaining trade monopolies that enriched guild members at the expense of independent meat sellers who couldn't afford membership fees and compliance costs. These powerful organizations inspected meat daily, checking for spoilage signs like discoloration, bad odors, and texture changes that indicated bacterial contamination, dangerous to human consumption, and capable of killing entire families through food poisoning, outbreaks that devastated medieval communities lacking medical treatment for severe digestive illnesses. Guild inspectors carried authority to impose heavy fines, confiscate spoiled inventory, and ban repeat offenders from meat trading entirely. effectively destroying livelihoods of butchers who violated freshness standards or preservation requirements designed to maintain public health and guild reputation. Punishment systems included public humiliation through pillory displays where violators faced community shame, while displaying spoiled meat that demonstrated their failures to maintain proper preservation standards expected from professional butchers trusted with family nutrition and survival. The most serious violations resulted in permanent exile from guild membership and meat trading privileges, forcing former butchers into poverty and social disgrace that affected entire families dependent on butcher shop income for survival during harsh economic periods. These regulations also controlled competition by limiting the number of licensed butchers allowed to operate in each town, creating artificial scarcity that drove up meat prices while ensuring existing guild members maintained profitable monopolies protected from outside competition through legal barriers that prevented qualified craftsmen from entering the staff. Meat trade without expensive guild approval and ongoing compliance costs. Military storage. Medieval castles and military campaigns required massive preserved meat supplies that could feed hundreds of soldiers for months during siege warfare or extended military expeditions across territories where fresh food procurement was impossible or dangerous due to enemy activity and hostile populations. Castle storage systems used combination preservation techniques, including salt-packed barrels, smoked meat hanging in tower rooms, and fat-sealed containers that created diversified food supplies resistant to different spoilage risks that could devastate armies dependent on single preservation methods during critical military operations. Military quartermasters calculated precise preserved meat requirements based on troop numbers, campaign duration estimates, and backup supplies needed for unexpected delays caused by weather, enemy resistance, or logistical failures that extended missions beyond original planning assumptions. These calculations meant life or death decisions for entire armies because insufficient preserved meat supplies led to starvation, desertion, and military defeats that changed political boundaries and national survival prospects during crucial conflicts. Large-scale meat preservation required industrial-level operations that consumed enormous salt quantities, demanded specialized storage buildings, and employed teams of preservation specialists who understood scaling techniques from household portions to military provisions, feeding thousands of soldiers daily. Quality control became even more critical in military settings because spoiled meat could disable entire armies through mass food poisoning that left troops unable to fight effectively during crucial battles that determined campaign success or failure. Emergency preservation techniques included rapid salt packing of fresh kills from hunting expeditions, battlefield slaughter of captured enemy livestock, and improvised smoking operations using portable equipment that maintained meat supplies during mobile campaigns where permanent storage facilities were unavailable for extended periods. Winter survival. Medieval communities faced annual survival challenges during harsh winter months when livestock slaughter peaked and preservation techniques determined whether families lived or starved before spring brought fresh food sources back to desperate villages and towns. Autumn slaughter seasons created massive meat processing operations as butchers worked frantically to preserve entire herds before cold weather made outdoor work impossible and snow blocked transportation routes that connected communities. With trading partners who provided essential preservation materials and alternative food sources, these preservation marathons required community cooperation as neighbors shared labor, preservation materials, and storage spaces that exceeded individual family capabilities for processing and storing large quantities of meat necessary for winter survival during seasons when hunting became difficult and domestic animals were too valuable to slaughter except during emergencies. Successful winter meat storage depended on temperature management using natural refrigeration provided by frozen ground, ice storage in insulated buildings, and controlled air circulation that prevented spoilage without allowing complete freezing that damaged meat texture and nutritional value needed for maintaining health during physically demanding winter activities. Family preservation knowledge passed through generations included timing techniques for optimal slaughter conditions, salt mixture recipes that balanced preservation effectiveness with taste requirements, and storage methods that maximized space efficiency in small homes where preserved meat competed with other essential supplies for limited storage areas. Women often specialized in preservation techniques like sausage making that utilized meat scraps efficiently while creating portable food products that could be stored in minimal space and consumed without preparation during emergency. Situations when cooking facilities were unavailable or dangerous to use during extreme weather conditions that threatened family survival through multiple interconnected challenges beyond simple food availability. Modern challenge. Medieval preservation techniques created food products so foreign to modern tastes that few contemporary people would willingly consume the heavily salted, smoke-darkened, vinegar-soaked, and fat-sealed meat that sustained entire civilizations through centuries of survival challenges that tested human ingenuity and determination. These preservation methods produced meat with leather-tough textures, intensely salty flavors, and unusual appearances that reflected functional preservation requirements rather than culinary preferences that modern consumers expect from meat products designed for immediate consumption rather than long-term storage under primitive conditions. The psychological challenge of eating medieval preserved meat extends beyond taste differences to include modern food safety concerns about preservation techniques that relied on trial and error experimentation rather than scientific understanding of bacterial contamination, proper temperature control, and sterile processing environments that contemporary food production requires for public health protection. Many medieval preservation products would violate current food safety regulations through salt concentrations that exceed recommended daily intake limits, smoking processes that create chemical compounds now considered carcinogenic, and storage methods that lack temperature monitoring systems required for preventing dangerous bacterial growth that causes severe illness or death. However, these ancient techniques demonstrate remarkable human adaptability and problem-solving abilities that enabled survival under conditions where modern preservation methods were impossible due to technological limitations, resource scarcity, and knowledge gaps that medieval people overcame through careful observation, community knowledge sharing, and willingness to accept risks that contemporary society considers unacceptable for routine food consumption. The fundamental question remains whether modern people, faced with similar survival challenges and technological limitations, could develop equally effective preservation solutions, or would succumb to food spoilage problems that medieval butchers solved through ingenuity, dedication, and acceptance of preservation trade-offs that prioritize survival over palatability, convenience, or contemporary safety standards that assume abundant resources and technological infrastructure unavailable to medieval communities fighting constant battles against starvation and food-related illness. Medieval butchers mastered preservation techniques that kept meat fresh for months using only salt, smoke, and ingenuity. Their survival methods saved countless lives during harsh winters and military campaigns when fresh food meant the difference between life and death. Ready to explore more medieval survival secrets? Subscribe to Medieval Forge for amazing insights into the ingenious techniques that helped our ancestors survive impossible challenges.